So regular viewers to the channel will know we've been going into Colchester Council for over 18 months now, raising various concerns. But this latest one on the safety certificates of 5G was the most simple, straightforward thing in the world. All they had to do was say, "Oh, thank you so much for letting us know. We'll make sure that all future certificates are from active companies, not dissolved ones." End of. And they're absolutely refusing to acknowledge there's anything wrong with accepting a safety certificate from a dissolved company rather than an active company. So the other week, Karina went back again to full council to raise her concerns, and the answers from the leader of the council were quite astounding. And one does have to question whether he should be running this council or not. But anyway, let's go to what Karina said, and you can make your own mind on that when we pick through his response.
Many in the community have grave concerns over the rollout of 5G technology due to the lack of safety testing. This is reasonable in light of telecoms companies warning investors to prepare for litigation for harm caused and insurance companies refusing liability cover for RF radiation. And councils countrywide are being duped with fraudulent safety certificates using names of companies that have been dissolved years ago. The Planning Inspectorate has had over 500 complaints. Further emerging evidence, in-depth health studies on the detrimental effects of 5G and a letter from experts have been sent to the council and seemingly ignored. Andrew Tyrrell, Head of Public Protection, said at the Environment and Sustainability Panel meeting in June last year, always open to considering new evidence and facts and adapting our strategies and our policies. This is evidentially untrue. After 8 emails back and forth, we are still no further forward. The council leader and chief exec, who's been copied in the correspondence, cannot see a problem with accepting safety declarations from dissolved companies who, of course, cannot be held liable in the event of harm to the public. I've been asked not to email on this matter again. For transparency and accountability, I'd like to propose that all public questions and answers are put on a publicly accessible database. The public would be able to know Council's response, avoiding repetition of questions that have your say, but more importantly, you can all see how your fellow councillors are responding and hold them accountable. Your families are affected by the decisions of the few, just as much as ours are. But you are in a position to directly do something about it.
On your wider points around a 5G, I'll just say yet again, we have investigated, officers have investigated at some length. They have shared with you and your colleagues the findings that they have. We simply put, don't see fraud.
Did he just say he doesn't see any fraud? No, surely not. Let's just listen to that one more time.
Don't see fraud.
So you don't see any fraud? Really? Well, allow me to assist with that. Here's the example that Karina gave you in the first email she sent. The applicant is CK Hutchinson Networks UK Limited, who incidentally have changed their names to Signal Infrastructure. Now they did that in 2022, so they should not be filling in any applications in 2023 with the name of a company they have changed, should they? Yet on the Declaration of Conformity, which is the safety certificate, self-certificating, 3 UK Limited, they were dissolved on the 27th of October 2015. Now the contact details of the operator is H3G. Should we take a look and see if H3G exists in Companies House? Yes, let's do that then, shall we? Well, what do you know? They were dissolved as well. So you don't see that the applicant, who hasn't even managed to get its own name correct on the application, having given a safety declaration, and the operator from companies that have been dissolved as fraud, Councillor King?
We don't see a failure of duty by council.
So you don't think it's the council's duty to check the information that's provided in planning applications? Really? If it's not down to you then, who should be checking it? Because you'll never guess what the Planning Inspectorate have to say on that, will you? Planning Inspectorate wrote, "It is the responsibility of the relevant local planning authorities to ensure any certificates submitted as evidence as part of the application are valid. Can you imagine if members of the public submitted planning applications with false documents? Can you imagine what would happen to us? But no, if you're a telecoms communication, it's absolutely fine. Go right ahead. Do what you like. Although technically speaking, local planning authorities have autonomous independent legal obligations to risk reconcile, as LPAs are directly assigned competent authorities under the EECC, which the government have not informed them of, and which the MPPF does not reflect. This is being addressed in the legal case that Karen Churchill is currently undergoing. The link is in the description to that.
And we don't see the health risks you describe. That's not to be dismissive of what might in time be found.
So you don't see any health risks then? Well, perhaps you should have read Karina's email a little more closely. She sent you various links, including one to a very recent study done by oncologist Leonard Hardell, and he showed conclusively what 5G does to the human body. And in speaking to Karen Churchill, she said there are 39,000 papers been done on EMFs. So the information is out there. It all depends whether the person in question is willing to look or not. And clearly, Councillor King and co are not willing to review the peer-reviewed research papers that conclusively show harm caused from EMFs and specifically 5G that does operate very differently to any of the other frequencies of which we're already bombarded with.
The point that was made by officers is still true, that if the evidence changes then the views of members should change as well.
Well, clearly that isn't true, Councillor King, because Karina has sent you the evidence from peer-reviewed papers, and she has offered to provide you lots of evidence to all the others. So if 39,000 papers is not sufficient for the Council to consider there might be harm from EMFs, what quantity is it going to take? Do let us know.
I've spent some time on this. I know other members have. I've looked at, in my lay way, at the evidence positions published by government and Ofcom, the World Health Organization, ICNUP, with their responsibilities for 5G and its health effects.
So just listen to this next bit very carefully, and do bear in mind that considering not a single long-term study has been done on 5G, because it's not possible, it's new technology, no one on planet Earth should be saying what he says next.
They all say 5G, like earlier mobile standards, is safe for the public.
Let's take a look at what they actually say, shall we? First off, there aren't any standards, there are only guidelines, which from a legal standpoint has very different implications. In the guidelines, safe is mentioned once with regard to setting safe exposure levels. But when it actually gets to those levels, here's what they say. Not a single mention of the word safe. Instead, they use that well-known scientific term of unlikely. It's unlikely to cause harm. Oh, good. So no, ICNUP does not say it's safe, Councillor King. It says it's unlikely. I would imagine they also said it was unlikely that thalidomide, DDT or asbestos would be problematical. Now, do bear in mind that ICNUP guidelines do not cover anyone with metal in their body. And that includes dental, it includes joint replacements, pacemakers, and I asked Ian Jarvis, who we've interviewed a couple of times on the channel, what about piercings? Are they included? And he said yes, anyone with any form of metal. Now, okay, you can take piercings out, unlike a pacemaker, but even so, why should you have to? Because presumably people who have punctured themselves actually want to have piercings. You are not covered with the safety guidelines from ICNUP, so just bear that in mind as well. Now, there's all sorts of flaws with the ICNUP guidelines, which we discussed a little bit with Karen Churchill and Stephen Thomas. Now, not many people have seen that video because unfortunately we interviewed them right at the point when the channel got shadow banned. So I'll put a link to that video in the description, as well as the interviews we've done with Ian Jarvis, because they are all well worth a watch. And in that interview, Karen shared a link to a paper that shows just how ineffective the ICNUP guidelines really are. But, you know, it's better than having absolutely nothing. So what about the UK government and the World Health Organization? You'll be pleased to know they don't use the word unlikely. No, instead, they say should. It should be fine. Oh, good. Just like DDT, asbestos, and thalidomide. Yes, It should be fine. So again, another highly scientific word is used. Should. It should be fine. Yes, it should. It should be absolutely fine. So fine, in fact. How about all the councillors get a 5G mast popped outside their house? And how about your children and grandchildren's house and their school? Because it should be fine, shouldn't it? Bit like those calves that should have been born with functioning eyes, but no, 30 of them in a field with a newly installed 5G antenna were born blind. Purely coincidental, no doubt. So if it's having that effect on cows, and when you think about their bone density and size, just imagine what could happen to children who are more susceptible to the effects of EMF because they have less bone density than adults, and also they have a higher concentration of water than us old crusty adults do. So they are a lot more susceptible to the effects of EMFs. Now, Councillor King also mentioned the World Health Organization. So in 2011, the World Health Organization listed EMFs as a possible carcinogen, i.e. can cause cancer. Yes, that well-known healthy thing that everyone desires. Well, since then they have also added the following. In 2021, they said that radiofrequency RF electromagnetic fields, RF EMF, were shown to induce oxidative stress in cell cultures and in animal studies. This can lead to mitochondrial DNA damage, as mitochondrial DNA is particularly vulnerable to reactive oxygen species, ROS. Besides the general effect on genome stability, affected organs include the brain, reproductive tract, leading to impaired cognitive functions and decreasing fertility. And finally, Councillor King listed Ofcom. Now, they refer to Public Health England's view that the overall exposure is expected to remain low relative to guidelines, and as such, there should be no consequences. Their favourite word again, should be no consequences for public health. And as Stephen Thomas pointed out, how can they possibly say it is safe when they don't assess the exclusion zones around every mast, where the ICNIRP levels are being breached? Good question. So there we have it. You are not covered by the vastly inadequate ICNIRP guidelines if you have any form of metal in your body, including piercings, nor are you covered if you stand within an exclusion zone, which I believe in the UK is about 50 metres. Not sounding overly safe, is it? Hardly surprising insurance companies refuse to insure them.
On the evidence as published and tested rigorously internationally, that's the position that we responsibly should take as a council. So simply put, I feel we've done our best to be helpful. We've gone a lot further than some might, frankly. We've gone round this a number of times. And that's why, unless you've got a new subject or a new angle, that's it for me on that subject. Thank you.
You don't appear to be willing to reassure the public that you will stop accepting fraudulent certificates. This doesn't seem difficult now that concerns have been highlighted. The children's health will be most affected and everyone will be bombarded with EMS. I am professionally aware of radio frequency and electromagnetic treatment within the work I do, and I know that it isn't safe. The evidence is there. Stop ignoring us. Thank you.
So it's not all doom and gloom. You'll be pleased to know that not all councils are like Colchester. Mendip Council looked at all the evidence that has been sent to Colchester, and they have turned down planning applications based on health concerns. So Councillor King is in no position to tell the council and the general public that EMF radiation is safe. It is thoroughly misleading to say that. Now, Councillor King has said he doesn't fully understand the technologies, which is fair enough, it is new. But that aside, I for one struggle to believe that someone in his position cannot see the importance of correct paperwork and having a company that's active doing the safety declarations and not one that's been dissolved and therefore will have no liability whatsoever. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. Do stick them in the comments below. But regardless of his lack of comprehension on this part and complete misunderstanding of what the word safe means, and whether this lack of understanding is down to incompetence or he's just lying, whichever of those it is, do you really think somebody like this should be running Colchester Council? Especially as hardly anyone voted for them. And it's even worse now, the mayor has stepped away from being a Liberal Democrat. So they've got even less people that less people voted for. And we're not the only ones in the community that are concerned by Councillor King's behaviour. On social media, various members of the public have nicknamed him Dodgy Dave. You might also remember this lady.
Mr. King, I am very sorry to say that from my experience in the councils and the communications with you, you do not seem to be honest.
She was back again at full council and made a recommendation for Councillor King.
And I invited him to step down voluntarily, or I will have to follow the complaints procedure. And the question today is whether you will step down voluntarily because you lied in a class cabinet.
We at Council Watch agree with her. We think it's long overdue that Councillor King step down and is replaced. So we will be writing to the head of the blue team, the red team and the green team and asking them whether they too are going to turn a blind eye to the very clear 5G fraud. And we'll get back to you with their responses, because whoever replaces Councillor King, you need to know whose side they are on. It'll be interesting to see the party political positions on this, but also individual councillors. This is going to affect your families too. So what are you going to do about this? Are you going to turn a blind eye as well? Bearing in mind it is the legal responsibility of the local authorities as to how much weight to put on the ICNIRP guidelines. They do not override your legal responsibilities and duty of care to the public. And an ICNIRP certificate presented by a non-existent company is clearly unreliable evidence from an unreliable source. And do not forget to assume safety is being preemptive, and this is unlawful. The ICNIRP guideline is just that, a guideline. Now, if any of you wish to email Councillor King on the subject of 5G, I'm sure he'd be delighted, as it would give him a change from dealing with Karina, who he no longer wishes to hear from. So perhaps you'd like to send him an email of what you think on 5G and any evidence you have that it's potentially harmful. And while you're at it, you could CC the Chief Exec of Colchester Council and your local councillor. I'll put Councillor King's and the Chief Exec's email addresses in the description below. It's very easy to find out the email address of your local councillor. You just go to the council website and it will show your councillors. It's all in alphabetical order, so just pick who your local councillor is and CC them in the email as well. And it should be very telling to see who your councillors are supporting, the public or the people making all the profits. And do feel free to publish your email on Facebook and Nextdoor or any other social media that you are on, so that everyone in the community can see how your councillor is responding and whether they too are going to turn a blind eye to the very obvious fraud that is happening with 5G. Now, very shortly, Karina is going to be putting in a formal complaint about Councillor King with misleading the council and the public over the safety concerns over 5G. Now, obviously, this will go absolutely nowhere. They always look after their own, but at least their complaint is on public record. And also then we can escalate it to the Ombudsman, who will also probably do nothing. But at least when things like this are put on public record, eventually enough will be piled up that when they decide to call a vote of no confidence, that we have provided them with sufficient grounds to do so. So it's over to you now. You must write to your councillor and give them your thoughts and evidence over the possible harms of 5G. Because they are not listening to us, they view us as a minority group of troublemakers. So the more people that email and show that this is a wide public concern over the safety, the better. So until next time, take care.